The story begins with a view of a figure moving on the ground. A voice welcomes a listener to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. On it, they have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the ultimate question, should one stay or leave? Then we see the lady who is listening to the podcast. She is Jen, jogging with a man named Dan, who trails behind. He tells her they have been together for a very long time. She modifies his statement to say it was a stupid amount of time. We see he does not like jogging to the same degree that Jen does, but he has to do it for her. Eventually, Dan needs to rest from the strenuous exercise. He repeats the words she told him about them being together for a stupid amount of time. He had more hair in the beginning, she comments. As they talk, we quickly learn they are unhappy with each other, especially Jen. Soon Dan convinces her to take a photo together. She wants to keep jogging, but he reminds her he did not cross any lines last night. She retorts that he wanted to cheat on her with many women, but he denies it. A lady named Veronica had emailed her to tell her that Dan was trying to get her to text him privately. Dan's excuse for his action is that he was just being friendly. Annoyed with him, Jen keeps jogging while listening to her podcast. Left alone, Dan takes a different route. During her jog, Jen sees someone standing to her left. Back to Dan, he experiences a troublesome ringing. Jen does too. Shortly after, she returns to the place they were at earlier. Something about it seems to spark her concern. She isn't the only one who becomes alert. Dan is also startled by sudden movement near him. However, he doesn't catch who or what it is. In a short time, he finds a trash can full of a black substance. Once Jen catches up to him, she wants to show him something. He admits he wasn't acting well last night. That's not what is on her mind though. She wants him to look around. Dan does not see anything, so she shows him a sign. She asks him where the trail is, which has supposedly vanished. He suggests that perhaps there are two signs, but she thinks that is absurd. The couple continues to jog together, but Dan has to stop due to the sound of ringing blaring in his ears. Soon they circle the area, returning to the sign. Dan's exhaustion prompts Jen to tell him to shut up, for it is merely his first lap. She asks again where the trail is. Looking around, Dan says it could be further ahead. The problem with his statement is that they already went around the entire area. The duo keeps walking, and Dan says this doesn't make sense. He is beginning to think the trail is somehow hidden by leafy branches. Jen considers his thinking to be odd. Dan gets an idea, involving them to go in opposite directions. When one of them locates the trail, they will yell out. Changing the subject, he apologizes to Jen and reflects that they have been together for a long time. Jen repeats her upsetting words that it was stupidly long. Though he agrees it is stupid, Dan wants to say something else, yet he can't find the words to say it. Thus, Jen starts walking in her direction. She looks around, but does not find anything. Dan eventually hears an eerie scream from a distance that does not sound like Jen. It doesn't take long for the couple to bump into each other, scaring her. The confusion is growing inside her, and she wants to know what is going on. Neither of them saw the trail. Standing side by side, he asks her if she hears the terrible ringing sound. Jen responds insensitively that he is simply hung over. Afterward, Dan comes across a no swimming sign near the pond. He has never seen anyone in it, and the needlessness of the sign annoys him. Jen offers the rational answer that perhaps people would swim in the pond if the sign wasn't there. She asks if he thinks someone is moving the sign. Dan tries to pull it out of the ground to demonstrate it's sturdy enough. Feeling very uneasy at this point, Jen wants to call someone and drops her earphones. Alas, her cell phone has no service. The next scene has the couple walking with their phones held up, trying to catch a signal. As they walk, they encounter a stranger on the road. Dan panics. The figure is concealed in the shadows, adding to the uncanny atmosphere. Dan and Jen resort to running away, riddled with fear and confusion. Returning to the sign, Jen runs into an interesting phenomenon. She picks up two sets of earphones instead of the one she dropped. Dan says he didn't know she had two of them, and she confirms that she didn't. She draws closer to him to ask if he is doing all this as a joke. If he is, she pleads for him to stop. However, the man says he can't play such a complicated joke. He adds he has an idea, and they head into the woods. Jen asks if it feels like they have been walking for a long time, to which Dan answers it doesn't. She thinks they should have come across something at this point, like houses or a road. Dan is certain they will. Subsequently, he stops to rest on a rock. The ringing returns to Jen, causing her to ask what it is. Since she has it too, he wants her to understand it wasn't brought upon by the wine, like she told him earlier. He also tries to assure his unhappy girlfriend that all will be fine, but she yells that nothing is fine. She constantly thinks about stabbing him in the neck. Launching into a frustrated rant, The lady complains they keep going like something is going to change. Alas, change never comes. She accuses him of snoring like a 500-pound man and drinking like an alcoholic. Retaliating, Dan tells her she is the reason he is proud of being addicted to material. However, Jen acknowledges it's the same for her. Even worse, she claims she would be happier with someone else. She thinks Dan is going to his grave alone. Reflecting on their miserable situation, he concludes there simply is no way for them to forgive each other. He thinks maybe time could be their solution, yet she doesn't have it, and neither does Dan. We learn that their rocky relationship has been going on for about 5 years. We also learn that Dan's mother hates Jen, according to the latter. Suddenly, Dan points in a random direction, saying they should go that way. As the couple keeps walking, Dan thinks he sees something. Once they arrive at the pond again, Jen frets at the circularity of their plight. She keeps expressing her discontent. Thus, the duo resorts to running through the woods until they make it back to the sign. Dan laughs whilst Jen screams, showing an interesting difference in their personalities regarding how they deal with an ample supply of chaos. He thinks this is a good joke, and she loses her mind, wondering what is going on. The two decide to get comfortable, getting some rest while they figure out what to do next. Dan hears the scream again, asking what it is. Jen says it's the word run being yelled by someone. Soon Dan starts to walk away, and she follows. Uncannily, he screams during their walk. Eventually, he sees a person from a distance and yells out to the figure. Suddenly, the person starts running away, and the couple follows frantically. When they draw closer, the stranger resumes running. Dan yells that they just want to ask him a question. Finally approaching the stranger, they see it's a man, standing with his back turned to them. Dan tries to talk to him, but the man doesn't respond back. Jen tries to get words out of him by saying they don't know how to get out of there. She asks if he knows where the trail is. Because he isn't talking, the couple whispers among themselves who should talk to him. Dan is scared the man might be violent. However, he has no problem with having his girlfriend speak to him under those circumstances. She's a powerful woman after all. Despite his compliment, she convinces him to do the talking. Keeping a safe distance between him and the stranger, Dan prods the man to speak, but it does not work. Thus, he picks up a rock, and Jen mouths to him that he should not throw it. She wants him to tap the stranger's shoulder instead, an action Dan isn't prepared to do. Dan warns the man that he will throw a small pebble at him, which won't hurt. After he throws it, he quickly moves back. Nothing happens, prompting Jen to run to tap the stranger on his shoulder before quickly running back to her previous spot. Unfortunately, none of their attempts do anything to provoke the man to react. Suddenly, someone runs past all three of them. This finally causes the stranger to turn around. Shockingly, he looks very much like Dan. He only has one word to yell to the couple, and that word is run. Once he yells it, he runs away himself. Following this bizarre happening, the duo is in disbelief at what they just witnessed. Dan asks Jen if the man looked like him, and she says he did. They both decide the situation is very weird, but that is a massive understatement. Dan turns to her, asking what the man who looked like him meant by telling them to run. She does not get a chance to answer him because another stranger appears behind her, scaring Dan out of his wits. As she fearfully turns to face him, he impales her with a sharpened stick. The sound becomes distorted for several seconds to show the severity of what has taken place. Poor Jen holds her arm out to her boyfriend, hoping he will rescue her. Yet what does he do? He cowers away, like she is someone he's never known. Dan keeps running and seems to bump into another him, making him fall. The person who looked like him is no longer there. When he gets up, he eventually stops to collect himself. In that moment, he realizes what he's done. Left his girlfriend of several years behind. Consequently, he turns around to start running back. As he does, he hears "run" being yelled again. Then he runs into a healthy Jen, whom he scares. Dan emotionally tells her he is sorry and wants her to stay there. She wonders what is wrong with him, but he tells the lady to stay there while he goes somewhere else. Once Dan returns to her, he scares her a second time with his sudden presence. She asks if he saw the trail. Given how he's talking to her, we see he could be an earlier Dan, not the one who recently left. He tells her which way they should go, and she is confused. Coming back to the no swimming sign, Dan starts to repeat the statements he made earlier, proving he is the past version. Jen also replies in the same way to him. However, something different takes place this time. Upon picking up her earphones from the ground, she tells Dan that hers are in her pocket. She adds, there are many of them. This time, it's him who wants to call someone. Yet their luck has not changed. There is still no service. During their walk, Dan stops to turn to Jen, saying he's not going to lose her. He assures her they will escape this place. When he asks her how long she has been there, she becomes confused by his question. He tells her the sun never moves, and it must burn after some time. It makes him repeat his determined words that they will escape together. Once they do, he promises they will be better to each other. Suddenly, a stick strikes his head, and he falls. Another Dan appears to see his other self, lying unconscious on the ground. The sight bothers him a lot. Interestingly, as Jen takes off the lying Dan's sweater, she tells herself that he probably figured out she was her from earlier. Looking at him, she says he was different in some good way. This prompts the conscious Dan to ask if she's going to make him think about what the unconscious Dan has that he does not. Jen does not know how to feel about seeing one lifeless Dan, because if more than one similar person exists, she reasons any one of them is allowed to perish without it creating a moral problem. Soon the unconscious Dan starts shaking, proving he isn't deceased. At this moment, we learn the conscious Dan struck him with a stick, for he says he doesn't want to hurt himself again. Thus, Jen is left with the task of collecting a stick to end the suffering Dan's life with it. Then the couple hears the earlier version of them, arguing somewhere close by. Jen responds to this by telling Dan to run. At a stream now, he drinks water from it, while she is washing her bloody hands. Getting disturbed that she's doing it right beside him, he is forced to spit out the contaminated water. Later, the couple hides behind a tree, observing another version of themselves. They watch themselves walk away, and Dan asks her if they should follow them. She tells him not to, but he wants to go alone. However, Jen says they shouldn't split up anymore. She also says he is the Dan she is used to, and does not want to deal with one who is worse. He wonders if there are worse versions of himself out there. If there are, he reasons there should be better versions too. He asks why some of them live, while others do not. She guesses it could be due to good choices. He does not know why this is happening, causing her to retort that it's because she is stuck in hell with him. Her statement interests him, and he asks if they really are in hell. They entered the woods during their jog, so he thinks they might have gotten hit by a car or eaten by a bear. Despite all the unknowns, Dan is starting to find their inexplicable situation somewhat comforting. But Jen gets angry, saying all of this could be the result of an alien device that crashed in the woods, altering time. Upon getting asked how long she thinks they were stuck there, Jen gives her classic response: a stupid amount of time. Then the duo observes their other versions again, and Dan says this is different. He wants to take a selfie of this bizarre moment with his other self in the background. Since the other couple is arguing, Dan says they look kind of cute when they are fighting. Soon the other versions go their separate ways. Jen wonders if they have to learn a certain lesson to escape this hell. Dan guesses that the better versions might be allowed to leave. They watch a third Dan approach the Jen they are observing. Once the second Dan returns, he runs into the third Dan. The original Dan comments on how different this is. They watch one of the Dans attacking the one who is on the ground, with it being uncertain which is which. Our couple chooses to stay stealthy and not intervene. As they continue to walk, they realize how hungry they are. Jen says he could hunt for something, but Dan wonders whether there are any consumable animals in the woods. Therefore, they keep walking in silence for some time. Reaching a trail, Jen oddly reflects that she does not know what she would do without him. After she chooses a direction for them to go in, we see a bloody earphone hanging on a branch. During their walk, Dan asks what she meant by her last statement. Due to her vague response, he guesses she does not know how to leave him. Soon, they hear the frightening yell of the word "run" again from a distance. When they return to the pond yet one more time, Jen loses her mind, realizing that they are going in circles. Dan has to hold her, listening to his distraught girlfriend yell that she's a person who makes good choices. This situation isn't fair, she agonizes. All Dan can do is hold her while wearing a sad face. She doesn't know what's real anymore or what is good or bad. She doesn't even know where she should go or what she should be looking for. In this crucial moment, Dan kisses her, and she tells him it's very stupid. Hugging her, he apologizes for everything bad he has said or done. Her feelings for him are mutual. Then she notices something they had not seen earlier. The couple approaches it to see it's a small tent. Jen complains about the smell it gives off. They also see an organ nearby. Several earphones hang near the entrance of the tent, and Dan touches them to see the blood they have collected. Getting partially inside the tent, Jen sees Dan's phone in there. Going through it, she finds someone in the water in one of the photos in the background. Shortly after, she sees something that prompts her to drop the phone in fear. It is a corpse. Surprised, Dan whispers that the corpse is him. Jen is fearfully curious to know how long it would take for him to look like this. Not concerned with her question, Dan considers it more important to acknowledge they can't get out. He tells her he is sorry. He does not know what to do, so he just says he loves her. At this point, they hear someone walking towards them. Soon enough, someone stands behind Dan, slamming him down. Jen falls and backs away into the tent. As the stranger, who is very likely another Dan, uses his stick to take our Dan's life, Jen utilizes this time to run away. While she runs, she falls into a puddle of blood and entrails. A deceased version of herself lies nearby. The horror of it makes her get up and run until she gets on a trail. Hearing Dan yelling behind her, she covers herself with a hood. She runs and the couple chases her like they did earlier. Encountering someone ahead, Jen stops. We focus on the pile of earphones beside her. Then she looks at the no swimming sign and finally decides to disobey it. Swimming in the water, she sees the other version of her with Dan running by. After she swims for some time, she gets out of the water, exhausted. The lady finds a strange object on the ground. She tries to touch it, but someone strikes her down. Following this, the stranger takes the unconscious Jen elsewhere by boat. Taking off the hood, the stranger is revealed to be another Jen. When they are on land, the unconscious Jen gets dragged along the dirt. She gets brought to an area where a hooded Dan is eating meat. For the first time, we see one of them eating. Alas, it doesn't look good, because human skulls are eerily decorating the area. The cannibal versions of Dan and Jen sit beside each other and consume raw meat, which belongs to different versions of themselves. They hear the chilling word "run" being yelled from far away, yet they don't seem to care. They finally seem at peace with being together.